we are up to the period of Gregorian, Ambrosian chant. Apparently, after Rome, the fall of Rome, music practically died out, and mention is made of it only when referring to singing in churches around the 4th century AD. So the Ambrosian chant, which is an interesting name, as in ambrosia, of the heart, compelled the congregation to pay attention, concentrate their minds while singing. 2 centuries later, the Ambrosian chant increased from 4 modes to 8, whatever that is, and resulted in the so-called plain song, or Gregorian chant, named after St. Gregory, the current pope at that time. And there is a reference to this in Jeffrey Hodgson's book, Clairvoyant Investigations, page 89 to 90, if you have that book. I think it's available as a PDF online as well. So the Ray 6 and the Age of Pisces was in full swing at the time, of course. So it represented the one-pointed devotion of that particular ray to help calm the emotions and give emotional control. And the Italian Guido, I think it is, of Jesu, in the 10th century AD, was the first composer to use harmonic chords and help to bring harmony home. Here we go. This is a well-known song. A bit more modernized, of course. Hope the sound and the video is okay. Skip through this. Hear the organ in the background. Female voices. Then we move on to a bit later. The so-called chordal music is a musical prototype of harmonious relationships. Its effect is to produce feelings of friendliness, which led to the introduction of hymns in church. And apparently Guido's music paved the way for art around 1280 AD, which was the beginning of the first Renaissance in Italy and parts of Europe. So then we have, as the picture shows to your right, the troubadours of the 10th to 13th centuries and the themes of chivalry and heroism fostered. And this is also linked to the Knights Templar and the Crusaders, of course, which were big in Europe, Portugal, Spain, France, and concerned other sixth-ray themes and Sagittarian themes of religion and adventure. Sagittarius being the sign of adventure, consciousness and physically. And so this led to a 13th century canon where there's this overlapping singing and considerably enhanced the earlier chordal music. And again, this was conducive to easier human relations, a kind of give and take. The canon was formed on that same principle. So we have an example, I think here, early music players of the troubadours. Of course, we have a lot of modern troubadours too that came out or re-emerged in the 60s and 70s. Not sure what language this is, but... And another example here Okay, you get the drift?
Gregorian.
Sorry? I think when I tried to fast forward on the other one, that's what made it stall. So to watch that. So we were talking about polyphony last week. We touched upon it anyway. Coming from two words, poly meaning many and phony meaning sounds. And there you have many sound frequencies, which of course can be seen as color, all intermingling with each other. It's seen as a sound wave. So in music, a canon is a contrapuntal compositional technique that employs a melody with one or more imitations of the melody played after a given duration. And you see a lot of musicians working with this on machines now, technology, playing 4 or 5 different tracks, different instruments, and then mixing them all together. So it's kind of a modern extension of that. The initial melody is called the leader, while the imitated melody, which is played in a different voice, is called the follower. And this corresponds to the 1425 grade 3 cycle of polyphony emerged at this time. And this is really at the height of the European Renaissance. And the third ray played a huge part in that, particularly in Italy. So the polyphony with many divergent, ramifying sounds, overlapping singing. And so the canon owed its mathematical qualities to this style, and apparently it tends to develop the intellect. Bach was the expression of the culmination of this polyphonic style, and hence went on to form that music, so that it was like a subjective influence that helped to form the Age of Reason, which began around about 1795. So remember I said last week, the people like Cyril Scott, who had that book called The Secret History of Music, one of his main contentions in that book was how music creates culture. It's a huge influence in creating a certain frequency that opens up a culture. So I'm just going to hold my microphone up to my mouth again. Okay. From the canon developed the fugue, where the quote here is a subject propounded by one part is prosecuted by another. It had a marked effect on mentality. More people start to use the reasoning powers. This led to finding flaws in religious arguments, which led to the Reformation and Protestantism. And again, what is a fugue? A fugue is similar to a round canon, like row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, except the voices do not always follow the leader in an exact manner. The fugue's opening differs from a round because as each new voice appears, it does not use the same exact notes. So,
a canon is a musical form where a melody is presented in one voice and imitated in a second voice after a short delay. There are numerous nice and catchy canons we all know from our childhood, such as Frère Jacques or Row, Row, Row the Boat, but also mind-blowing, super complex, mathematically sophisticated canons by composers throughout music history. And just to name a few names, Guillaume Dufay, Johann Sebastian Bach, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Joseph Haydn, Beethoven, Brahms, Messiaen, originally a priest, known by us all for 3 violins and a bass. We can see and hear that each imitation of the melody enters 2 bars apart.
Oh, I didn't want to stop that, but so beautiful. But there's your good example there for you. So the pre-Elizabethans to Handel marked an advance in polyphony to about 1450 AD, then a period of weakness to about 1480. Then came a prodigious evolution in 3 types of music. One, church music, which was solemn and related to, according to Cyril Scott, to higher thought, drama, and philosophy. So it sounds quite Saturnian, doesn't it? And 2, madrigals, which were varied, ranged from being very grave to gay, inspiring grace, gaiety, sweetness and sadness. And of course, some of the descriptions here certainly fit the 4th ray of harmony through conflict, which is the ray of music, incidentally, but has that very marked polarities in happy, sad, so forth. Then thirdly, chamber music, which was light and pleasing and inspired wit and poetic sentiments. The combination of all of them led to the Elizabethan age, the playwrights, the poets. This is the 1500s, of course, when Queen Elizabeth I was in power, the mid-1500s. And there was a strong third subray of the third ray, which expressed itself through maths, astrology, philosophy, and there was a great brilliance of expression of intellect and happiness and huge productivity apparently. Of course, John Dee was Queen Elizabeth's astrologer. Francis Bacon, a previous incarnation of the Martha R, was around at this time. And of course, Elizabeth herself was most definitely a disciple or initiate. And so, for example, the Book of Madrigals.
Come, sweet love, where the golden morning breaks, o'er the earth, o'er the air, of love and pleasure speaks. Teach thine arms to embrace, and sweet rosy lips to kiss, and mix our souls in mutual bliss. Eyes were made for beauty.
Ordered this here. I think you get the drift. There's some madrigals. And, of course, the Elizabethan age, there is Elizabeth herself. I do have a astrological article about Elizabeth I on my website, should you like to read up about that, with all the courtiers and so forth. And over here we have a modern day reenactment on the stage of Elizabethan singing plays and so forth. Of course, that's when Shakespeare wrote all these plays during this time, and the Francis Bacon was the one overshadowing Shakespeare to write all those plays. Another example here. William Byrd. Note that high metallic twang that, of course, was the basis of the harpsichord, and a lot of Bach's playing later on. This gigantic organ here you see in this church, in this cathedral, a monster, and quite prevalent through many cathedrals and churches throughout the world, of course. The organ, since at least 951, had a spiritual effect, bringing the unseen nearer the human heart. It created an atmosphere of austere grandeur and exalted magnificence, produced profound spiritual effects, but also religious austerity and Puritanism. So all kinds of music has different effects on different people, of course, and I guess music has its shadow side as well, lower and higher expression. So the Puritans suppressed the use of church organs, but it was a superimposed condition to faith. And we were talking last week about how people like Plato and Aristotle forbade certain types of music which they felt would affect the culture. Just as, of course, in the 1950s and 60s, there was a great uproar about rock and roll poisoning our culture. And that's something that we'll deal with next week in the third final class of music. Sherry says, listening to this beautiful music reminds me of high school. I sang Gregorian in high school at Mount St. Mary's. Most appropriate. Thanks for sharing, Sherry. Yeah, and as I said last week too, the singing in the choir is one of the most satisfying and joyous things that you can do. And it's a good way to learn to sing too, to harmonize your voice with other voices. And of course, doing that is a really good metaphor for group work in this Aquarian new age that we're going into. Harmonize our skills, our voices, so to speak. So Henry Purcell was one of the main leaders of this kind of sacred organ music from about 1659 to 1695. Didn't live very long, 41 years there. And in 1675, during his life, the seventh ray cycle started. And this is very important because I think Handel and someone else incarnated at that time and expressed quite a bit of that seventh ray, and perhaps Henry Purcell did too. This music added the sweetness of the Italian melody and madrigals to the severer, austere beauty of the Elizabethan counterpoint, and stirred the gentler emotions and affected the mentality. So I've written ray 2 there, the gentler emotions, or the gentler side of the sixth ray, which is the most common ray that rules the emotional body. And so this music served to render religion more attractive, and in fact packed churches out with songs like Te Deum, and paved the way for Handel's music, who lived from 1685 to 1759. So an example of Henry Purcell's. Here. So I think you get the idea. Magnificent church organs, organ pipes. So as I said before, some of this music helped bring about the Reformation. It helped people become more mentally discriminating and make arguments about religion and so forth. Martin Luther, of course, 1483 to 1546, and who did his famous posting of his edicts upon the wall, in Germany. And this led to religion becoming the common property of the people, not just the sole province of priests. Three composers had a marked influence on this 100-year period: Orlando de Lasso, Palestrina, and Monteverde, who most of you, the latter one, probably familiar with. I think we've got some Palestrina here to play, which is absolutely sublime. But notice that they are all incarnate around the time of the latter part of the Renaissance and the Elizabethan era. This was represented the passing out of Ray 6, which was in 1525, and led to the 1575 cycle of the second ray of love wisdom becoming much stronger. All these rays cycled in and out of the incarnation, as we discussed in the late class. Of course, Queen Elizabeth I was reigned from 1586 to 1589. Maybe a bit longer than that, but anyway. And so here is Palestrina. And here's his music. Magnificent experience. Great music. So I encourage you, any of you, to look up more of Palestrina's music on YouTube, places like that. Some really beautiful pieces. Some of them go for 3 hours too. Some of these compilations of different composers. So Orlando de Lasso gave more appeal to music. He gave mankind a glimpse of the spiritual through the emotion, aspired to the attainment of pure devotion. Of course, all these composers are Italian, and Italy is the sixth-ray soul, the fourth-ray personality, very much on the second-ray love wisdom line. And of course, they were all products of the latter part of the Renaissance. Palestrina deeply touched the heart and elevated the mind. His work breathes divine harmony, inspired people to sing in a manner truly sublime that praises God. There's the sixth ray again, of course. So he had an emotional, mental appeal, helped people to think in a spiritual way. One historian even says that his 1560 Mass has almost immediate results, which helped to revive religion and institute an epoch of devotion. Again, the sixth ray of religion, of devotion, of idealism, and Pisces too. And if you go into deeper studies of these composers and their horoscopes, you probably find the sixth ray and in certain signs like Pisces or the water signs very strong. Monteverdi is regarded as the greatest Italian composer of the 17th century, helped reform polyphony. And all of the above helped pave the way for the mystics, poets, and philosophers who appeared after the 16th century. So we have Luther, and we have the so-called chorale, the congregational hymn, was one of the greatest contributions to the Lutherans. Luther himself was a great lover of music and a composer of some skill, apparently. And we've lost a lot of this information in this day and age of so-called information technology. It's a kind of an irony or a paradox that with our education systems, we've lost the knowledge or understanding of what's these great, these giants of culture that have helped form music and evolve it to the present day. So there they are, Palestrina, Galesso, and Monteverdi. Some very interesting portraits, particularly the one of Monteverdi. And a bit more music to play. We have Monteverdi. Jois says you're bringing back the love of church to feel, indeed. And I'll just skip through a few more parts here. Of course, a lot of it, this kind of music is not something that a lot of people like. A lot of people were forced to go to church, and so this music reminds them of having to attend church every Sunday, forced to go there by their parents, that kind of thing. And what about Hildegard de Bingen? Someone asked, Agnieszka. I did make a post about her, one of my previous articles on Facebook yesterday and on the Esoteric Astrologer Telegram channel. If you want to read it. I think I might have her further on down here. But if not, we'll put her in next week. I think I have some, in fact, in that article on my website, Hildegard von Bingen, you can listen. There's a video there that has quite a bit of her music. So we'll just skip through to another couple of parts of this one. So all the beautiful Italian Renaissance paintings. This utter devotion lost in the heavenly world's adoration of the angels of Mary, Jesus, etc. More angels. Of course, this sort of music really attracted those beings from the Diva kingdom. Now we come to Scarlatti, 1685 to 1757, a harpsichord player who created charming, rippling music inducing feelings of gaiety and exhilaration, and created greater mental alertness. Again, another Italian whose sharp intellect is well known, of course. The organ, again, invokes this reverence and devotion, and the piano that evolved from that was the hammers of the harpsichord that were covered with felt. The harpsichord was, as I said before, more of a sharp metallic twang, and the opposite of the organ. The organ is much softer, of course. And Scarlatti's music kind of reflected the wit and brilliance of the French philosopher Voltaire, who lived in the same sort of period. Had a very, very cutting edge kind of mind. So the polyphonic music stimulates the intellect into this stinging effects of plucked strings, created a somewhat caustic and satirical wit of people like Voltaire, and kind of a general trend in that age. So it was a kind of an edgy sort of factor of the critical mind, kind of finding fault with it, that kind of thing. After the disappearance of the harpsichord, wit began to diminish apparently. The pianoforte took over, which had a much mellower tone. Scarlatti's music had an immediate effect, the more facile, exhilarating, the more immediate and the ephemeral its effects, many tuneful and easily comprehensible composers en masse had an almost immediate effect. And this concerns the seventh ray. Again, notice that Scarlatti incarnated right on the start of the seventh ray cycle in 1685. And souls who have particularly pertinent rays in their makeup will do that in order to take full advantage of the incarnation of a particular ray. And so a little bit of Scarlatti's music. There's that rippling effect. See how upbeat it is. All right, enough already. Thank you, Mr. Scarlatti. So we're moving towards some of the more well-known European composers now. Again, quoting from Cyril Scott here, whereas Beethoven's deeper music took about 100 years to work, there was an effeminacy of attire and manners so pronounced in the 18th century. And this was related also to the seventh ray. Courtesy, the word courtesy and curtsy, when you curtsy and bow and scrape and go through all those kind of courtly, the courtesy is related to the court, to all the seventh ray rituals of the court that people attended with their powdered wigs and all the rest of it, in just about every European country. You look back on that today, it's like, they were in a permanent fancy dress party, you could say. So a similar trend started apparently in Greece. The incidental and the external, or the peripheral, superficial, started to predominate over the essential and eternal. Scarlatti's insignia in music are shakes, runs, variations, adornment, bowings and scrapings, and trills and furbelows. To use a few old-fashioned words there. Scarlatti and Mozart were friends, but also great rivals. And of course, Salieri was the great rival of Mozart, which was brought out in the movie about Mozart. A gentler side of life was carried to extremes, and so you had Jane Austen from 1775 to 1817, Pride and Prejudice. She was born right on the start of the fifth ray cycle, which of course is very strong with the in the ray makeup of Britain, of London in particular. So we can see how all the arts affected one another in this respect, but music in particular is like a foundational factor. Musically, this started with a romantic folk song and then was elaborated by Scarlatti, reached its culmination in music from about 1756 to 1791. And at this time also, the romantic poets and writers incarnated to help offset the excesses of the Industrial Revolution, which was ruled by Rays 3, 5, and 7. And this was a belated effort somewhat by the hierarchy who were watching over humanity at the time and realized some of the dangers of these 3, 5, and 7 rays and their shadow, and how it could really create a deep materialism. I've mentioned before in some of my newsletters about William Blake, who was one of the poets and artists of that time, that the experiment by the hierarchy at that time to bring these poets and writers in was regarded as a failure. So Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart expressed the gentler side in music. He was a musical interpreter par excellence of all the little vanities of the daily round, as was Haydn apparently. The last third of his work was more serious, and his best compositions apparently were quite Masonic. He was a Mason, I think. And Mozart was a Aquarius son with Virgo rising. So he really applied that meticulousness of Virgo to his mathematical music. but his music came from an ideal realm. It was airy, it was outside time, that's how it's been expressed. And he wrote a Jupiter symphony. And Jupiter, of course, is the sole ruler of Aquarius, where his sun is. Jupiter symphony was about the theme of liberation. There's, we could do an entire class on some of these great composers, of course. It's just touching very superficially upon some of them. But, of course, Mozart, I think I said something like several years ago now. No, I'm not going to go there. I can't remember the quote, so I'll probably mangle it. But words to the effect that when you listen to Mozart's music, you know there is a God. From the movie Amadeus, I think, no, it's a modern concert. Not very good video quality here, but the sound should be okay. Most of us know Mozart's music fairly well. I think, in fact, this might be the Jupiter symphony. I'm going to fast forward. Incredible. Can you imagine a composer like Mozart who was thinking about 30 or 40 different instruments that's expressing his music? And here's a quick clip of a scene from the movie Amadeus.
Mozart. I can't think of a time when I didn't know his name. I was still playing childish games when he was playing music for kings and emperors, even the Pope in Rome.
Of course, Mozart was a child prodigy. At the age of 3 or 4, he was writing and playing. And of course, this represents so much work achieved in previous lifetimes that he brought through and woke up very early to.
I admit I was jealous when I heard the tales they told about him.
Whoops, sorry.
That was Mozart. G. Excellent.
Apparently he was very, very playful and mischievous character.
Continue. Very
He
good.
was one of those.
Very good, Majesty.
But then Mozart shows them how to do it. Somewhere here. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So both Mozart and Haydn acquired immediate fame and had immediate effect on audiences. The effects of music was not as great as others, yet the French Revolution in the 1790s was perhaps the breakdown and rebuilding that the seventh ray energy brought in, the seventh ray crystallization being broken up but also rebuilt, doing the rebuilding. So this was also the age of enlightenment. the American and French revolutions, the discovery of Uranus, the ruler of the seventh ray, and of course the incarnation of the fifth ray, 1775, was all around this time. Huge cultural ferment and revolutions going on. And apparently the music of that time found its culmination in Bach, which relates to logic and an unalterable conformity to law, the unity of an idea, and formal construction. Very fifth ray, fifth root race kind of stuff, but of course united with the beauty of the harp. The life of Bach is something that would be an interesting read, I think. He had an extraordinary life. And 1685, like Handel, he incarnated right on the year of the seventh ray cycle beginning. Handel found, although he was German, I think, found his fame in the UK, but both vastly influenced the intellectuality of German people with its highly inspired genius, profundity, and mathematical exactness. So, of course, Germany's fourth ray soul, as I mentioned last week, and its great gift to humanity was this huge crop of composers that came forth from the soul of the nation and gave such beautiful music to the world. Bach's music and Handel's was responsible for some of the German thinkers' greatest endeavors and a rich harvest of German composers who followed. This is taken from music forms by Jeffrey Hodgson. Now, I've got a great clip here. I mentioned last week Leonard Bernstein and his great teaching videos online, music appreciation videos. I've got two to play to you. This is the first one, which is talking about Bach.
Into an event of consummate importance. Now, in a few moments, the great young pianist Glenn Gould is going to play with us a movement from a Bach concerto. Gould and Bach have become a kind of legendary combination in spite of Gould's extreme youth and Bach's extreme age. Now, of course, Gould has exactly the same performance problems with Bach that our friends conductors A and Z have had with Beethoven, only more so, because Bach, way back there in the early 18th century, belonged to a time when composers weren't being very generous with information about how to play their notes. Just look at this first page from the D minor concerto we're going to hear. We are told what instruments are playing, like a dramatis personae, and we are told what notes they play. But besides that, there's nothing but a pitifully few clues to performance. Allegro,
Okay,
fast,
I'm going to fast forward here. And
volume,
he's an accomplished
like
pianist
this.
himself. And of course, there's the Leonard Bernstein movie out now, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. Apparently it's very good. I'm going to fast forward now to
Well, that
Glenn
might
Gould. Well, there's a bit of conducting that Bernstein does
Collected
that's worth
utterance,
looking
a
at.
sequence of short, separate little phrases which strung together might make a more varied and interesting sentence, like this. Well, whatever it turns out to be, it will probably not be in either of the extreme styles we have just illustrated.
And Glenn Gould, who was quite a prodigy, very unusual man, first completely wrapped up in playing. You look at some of the expressions on his face. Those fingers built for the piano. All right, you get the drift. So Glenn Gould, a very interesting musician, died very young at the age of 50. Had incredible sensitivity. Should make an excellent astrological biography, actually. So, all right, any questions or comments, clarifications so far? So we move on to another clip, which I'm going to play fully of for 5 minutes of Leonard Bernstein. It's a brilliant clip and says a lot of things. Leonard Bernstein lecturing at...
What we're trying for is a very high overview of musical development in terms of a vocabulary constantly being enriched by more and more remote and chromatic overtones. It's as if we could see the whole of music developing from prehistory to the present in 2 minutes. Now let's again pretend we're hominids and that the smash hit of the moment is, let's say, Fair Harvard. Here we are in our hominid hut crooning Fair Harvard, and now maybe our wives and maybe our prepubescent sons join in, and automatically we're singing not in unison but in octaves, since men's and women's voices are naturally an octave apart. And the blessing surrender thee. Now that octave interval, I wish I could sing an octave so I could really show you what I mean. But that octave interval happens to be the first interval of the harmonic series, as you remember, right? Okay, now centuries pass, and the next interval of the harmonic series is assimilated by humanity.
This is what we were talking about last week with these various octaves.
Namely the fifth. And now we can be singing this. By those festival rites. Now, of course, this little change brings us forward a mere 10 million years into the 10th century AD and into a fairly sophisticated musical culture. But now we admit the next interval of the series, the fourth, and now we can mix intervals of the octave and the fifth and the fourth. That's beginning to sound like polyphony. And again comes a great leap as music absorbs the next overtone, the third, and just listen to the difference. It's a whole new music, richer, mellower, with a new coloristic warmth. And as we know, this new interval of the third, because I like the older sound better, but anyway, as we know, this new interval of the third introduces into music the phenomenon of the triad, so that now Fair Harvard can begin to sound more like its Victorian self. And so there is born what we now call tonal music, a stable tonal language firmly rooted in the basic notes of the harmonic series, the fundamental and its first different overtone, the fifth, now and forevermore to be known as the tonic and the dominant. And that fifth interval really does dominate, because once this tonic-dominant relationship is established, it's a field day for composers. There can now be fifths of fifths of fifths of fifths, each one of them a new tonic producing a new dominant, a whole circle of fifths. 12 of them, in fact, always winding up with the starting tone, where they're proceeding upwards, let's say from the low C, G.
I'm just going to pause that. We need to squeeze in a bit more to finish this class. So you can find this video on YouTube, of course, if you want to watch the rest of it. But he made some very important statements there that that we've been mentioning last week and today. So Handel, 1685 to 1759, was responsible for many characteristics of the Victorian era. Again, we have the seventh ray. It came in on 1675, by the way. I said 1685 before. That's very close, of course. Him and Bach coming in at that time. And so the seventh raised the array of organizations, so created an orderly system of tuning and harmonization. Handel's mission was to revolutionize the state of English morals, which swung from extreme laxity to unused brain. His music reached maturity about 1739 and took time to bear fruit because higher types of music have slower results. The effects of awakening or reverence, or as in the Hallelujah chorus of his Messiah, is a point in fact, and it is also what Jeffrey Hodgson comments on. And I mentioned in this link here, Esoteric Astrologer down the bottom, which is a profile about Jimi Hendrix, that he lived in Handel's flat in London. What are the chances of that? It's a pretty amazing coincidence, I think. Two extraordinary musicians, centuries apart. So anyway, you can find, if you go to search by subject on my website, you can find, and type in Jimi Hendrix, you'll find that article. Of course, Handel's most famous music was the water music, performed on boats on the Thames in London. This was also a racing sub-cycle that went from 1700 to 1850, very strong religious themes. People like Wesley were part of that era. And the water music was a combination of emotions and formalism. Of course, the British can be very formal in that respect. It had a repetition and imitativeness and grandeur, and resulted in a love of outward ceremony and adherence to convention. And this is also borne out in Britain's horoscope, in their exoteric horoscope of Capricorn. So it brought a necessary balance of Victorian prudishness and priggishness to balance UK's overall development, or Britain's overall development. It had religion, which wasn't coordinated with spirituality. Handel was a fusion between Anglo-Saxon races, and of course, that was the fifth branch race of the fifth sub-race of the fifth root race, which made the so-called 555. And you'll notice that in Bernstein's discussion before, he's talking about fifth, and Bach was big on fifths, and the fifths, of course, corresponds to the fifth ray, fifth plane of perception, the mental plane, so forth. So, I have to wind it up on Beethoven, I think. We don't have any musical pieces selected for him just yet, but we'll just run through a few things about Beethoven, 1770 to 1827. Almost made it to his second Saturn return, and portrayed, of course, every variety of human emotion. Born on a fifth ray cycle, he treated princes rudely, but they showered him with money. His music was very first ray, induced a sympathy on a previously unknown scale. And he's probably a first ray emotional body, in fact, I think, Beethoven. Inspired very deep feelings and made possible the latest science of psychoanalysis because of the way it evoked feelings and humanity globally, of course, not just in Europe. And so his music or tone poetry expresses all in a cipher which the heart understands without the conscious interference of the mind. That's why Beethoven's music is so moving, and of course expresses the fourth ray of harmony through conflict, the soul ray of Germany, and probably his soul ray. Many of I think these great German composers came in as fourth ray souls, emerging from the soul of their nation. And of course had a tempestuous life, which is very much the ups and downs of the fourth ray. And of course the movie about him is very moving too. With Gary Oldman, who played Beethoven. it called Dearly Beloved or something like that. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. We'll recapitulate Beethoven next week, and I'll have some couple of nice pieces of his music to play as well. And Rachel says, what types of music composers attract angels? I think all types of music, really. If it's higher music related to the soul, or the higher mind, it will attract angelic beings, whereas lower music will attract lower angelic beings. There's a frequency that ranges from the most gross up to the most sublime. Of course, there are other composers like Wagner. These are some of the giants of modern music. As I said last week, the Jeffrey Hodgson's Music Forms book, there I showed a picture of a form that angelic beings had built during a performance in the concert hall itself that was clairvoyantly seen by Jeffrey Hodgson, who described it to an artist and who painted that particular picture. I don't have this file here right now, but I think you might remember it. It's like the triple leaf, like the French insignia. Of course, during the summertime in Germany, we have these wonderful outdoor concerts. People like Andre Rie is his name, the violinist guy, composer or conductor, and many brilliant singers and artists, and of course many other concerts in other countries all around Europe during the summer. Rachel says, when you spoke about poets to offset the Industrial Revolution, was bringing poets in supposed to do? How did it? But well, it was the Romantic poets like Byron, Shelley, Keats, all those guys and gals, who are bringing in a very strong 2-4-6 line of energy to offset the 1-3-5-7 of the Industrial Revolution. And they didn't fail in themselves, of course, but it failed to counter the materialism of the industrial age. I do have a quote about that somewhere. There's a couple of articles I've written about William Blake on my website. And in one of those articles, a more recent one, I think, I give a more detailed, I think I give the quotation from DK about the failure of that experiment. There's so much to know and explore, isn't there? Like I was saying before, I'm very interested in examining the souls of nations and the individual souls that come forth from the soul of a nation to express the nation's soul, and to look at the horoscope rays of the individual compared to the nation itself. This will be the new astrology of the Aquarian age, I'm sure.